Diversity is the key for sustainability. You keep doing one thing again and again, you will see a problem. That's we have seen in our herbicide based methods of weed control.
Something to Chew On is a podcast devoted to the exploration and discussion of global food systems. It's produced by the Office of Research Development at Kansas State University. I'm Maureen Olevnik, Coordinator of Global Food Systems. We welcome back co-host Dr. Jim Stack, Professor of Plant Pathology. Weeds can reduce food crop yields by more than 30%. These interlopers compete for resources, including soil nutrients and water. We attempt to control weed growth through chemistry, but over time, they manage to mutate, overcome, thrive, and adjust to given management techniques. So how is this problem solved when the need for food production will continue to increase and the challenges caused by climate change create a moving target? Today, we will hear more about weed management techniques, old and new, and the tools being developed to achieve food crop yield optimization with Dr. Vipan Kumar, Assistant Professor in the Department of Agronomy at Kansas State University.
I want to welcome you, Vipin. Would like to, before we get started in the technical side of things, just get a little background and understanding of who you are and how you got to the place that you are today as far as your professional interests go.
Sure. So my name is Vipan Kumar. I'm originally from India. I did my bachelor in crop science, but finished in 2008 from Punjab Agricultural University back in India, in the state of Punjab. It's a northwestern state in India, mainly known for wheat production and rice production. And it's very big in ag, Punjab state. So my original goal was to help communities there, especially the farming communities, to management practices they are doing. So I did my bachelor there, and then I started my master in wheat science in PAU 2008, fall 2008. But somehow I was also interested to come abroad and expand my education here in the States. So I was looking through some programs, and during that time I got to know there is a master positions open in Louisiana State. So I applied there and I got invited and came over 2009. That was summer 2009. Started my graduate research assistant with LSU, Louisiana State University. So that program was specifically looking for someone who can help growers in terms of managing their irrigation water, irrigation scheduling, developing some crop coefficients for the cotton crop in northeast side of Louisiana. So I was based in actually a research center. It was in northeast Louisiana, about 4 or 5 hours from the main campus, Baton Rouge. So my whole research was on research center, and I got to know very few people there, but I had a very excellent project to work with. So during that time was doing a master, I got interested in weed science because one of my committee member was a weed scientist. He was a superintendent with the research center, and he was on my committee, and glyphosate resistant palmer amaranth was kind of getting a lot of attention during that time in cotton. So during that conversation and meeting with his students, I got interested in wheat science. So finishing master, and then I started applying for a Ph.D. program. So I think during that time, there was not a whole lot of opportunity because of the economic constraints, but I found one position in Montana State University, 2011. So I started my PhD 2011 in Montana State University, Bozeman. The whole my dissertation research was focused on herbicide-resistant weeds, mainly tumbleweed, kochia, looking at characterizing herbicide resistance evolution, how we can manage in terms of what strategies growers can use to control herbicide-resistant kochia in different cropping systems. So that was for 4 years I spent there. And then just immediately after finishing my PhD, I started my postdoc there, and 2-year postdoc in the same program in Montana State. So 2017, I got here at K-State, got this position where I am in Hayes as an assistant professor in weed science. Part of my responsibilities, I'm a 100% researcher. All the focus is on developing integrated weed management strategies for Western Kansas, looking at herbicide resistance evolution in weeds. What are the novel and innovative strategies we can come up for our dryland or no-till dryland growers in Western Kansas? So that's I have been doing last for more than 4 years in Hayes, Kansas. And a little bit history on this position. My predecessor, Dr. Phil Stallman, he had spent 42 years on this role. He's like one of the pioneer in herbicide resistance management in high plains, especially in dryland cropping system in Kansas. So right now, leading a statewide program, research program, and a little bit outreach program, because I've been involved with a lot of growers here, although my appointment is not extension or no extension tenths, but been doing some extension as well. So that's kind of in the nutshell what I'm doing here.
That's great. Okay, well, thank you so much for that overview. That's helpful in me understanding a little bit more about what it is you're doing. In reading through some of the information I found on your website about what you do, there was a lot of discussion on no-till and the impact of no-till on managing weeds and that type of thing. Can you tell me a bit more about what that term means and how it impacts the growing area?
Sure. Since the Dust Bowl period, the soil conservation practices have been, taken place among growers. And the main reason was those soil conservation practices were to conserve the soil and other resources for longer term, because soil erosion in these areas, especially the Great Plains area or High Plains area, was pretty obvious. And because weed control was generally achieved by tillage. So folks till the ground and control the weeds in history, if you see, that's like number one method it used to be. And then USDA and RCS folks came up with this idea of conserving the soil, not to till the ground, just to preserve the soil from erosion, as well as not to blow the surface soil where we have fertile soil. So no-till is basically a concept brought up after the Dust Bowl period and got adopted by growers throughout the Great Plains. And no-tillage equipments also got into the market after that, like no-till drills, no-till planters, that growers don't have to till the ground to make the seed bed. They can directly go and plant or drill their crops. And this idea or concept was achieved with the chemical weed control. So if you look at after 1940s, when this chemical era started, like the 2,4-D came into the market, or any other oxenic herbicide came into the market, one of those early products came into the market, growers started using those, and they found very convenient to kill those weeds and not to till the ground. So this chemical era helped to adopt that concept of no tillage in high plains as well as in throughout the Great Plains. So mostly what growers been doing is they don't till the grounds, they clean their fields before planting and after planting an in-season crop by using chemicals, by using herbicides. So it's kind of serving two purposes. They are controlling the weeds and they are also conserving the soil. Another aspect of doing no tillage is to conserve the moisture. We are in semi-arid regions. Our annual precip is not that great. If you look at historically, we are somewhere between 12 to 24 inches, depending on the place where you are in the Great Plains. So doing a no tillage practice also help conserving the moisture throughout the winter's time. So whatever the snow or the moisture comes, if you don't till the ground, it stays there for the subsequent crop to plant and have the crop in place. there are two things, basically conserving the soil and conserving the moisture, that no-till practice came into existence. But however, I would also like to emphasize over the last 10, 15 years, what has happened is because we have relied too much on chemicals, too much on herbicides, and we are seeing evolution in weeds. They are developing or evolved resistance to these chemistries, what folks have been using in our systems. So herbicide resistant weeds have really become a threat to this no-till production system. And chemical industries are struggling in terms of bringing new chemistries into the market because there's not a whole lot of investment going into bringing a new mode of actions, especially from herbicide standpoint. So the dilemma is to control those herbicide-resistant weeds, we need alternate strategies, alternate methods of weed control. So that's where my role kind of come into, that where that fit is, how we can combine different methods of weed control, including chemical or non-chemical, and come up with some sort of sustainable system that can go in longer term.
Yeah, if I could follow up with a question, how prevalent is this problem globally, the herbicide resistance?
Globally, it is the number one problem for weed science communities as well as the grower community. Wherever folks have been using herbicides, we have been seeing increasing trend. After 1980s, we have been seeing exponential increase in number of cases of herbicide-resistant weed population being reported. There is a website called weedscience.org that documents every single case being reported throughout the world. And if you go to that website, you will see after 1980s, that graph has just jumped to the highest level. And it's not only one herbicide, it's basically, all the available herbicide mode of actions. We have reported cases of resistance somewhere in the world. In the US, we are leading in that graph country-wise in terms of herbicide resistance. The complicated issue is, okay, one time a herbicide fails, for example, a glyphosate. So folks start using other herbicides or other mode of actions. But now, been doing those things, we have been seeing multiple resistance in our weed populations. So resistance not only to one herbicide mode of action, but 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, even 6 herbicide mode of action resistance in those weed species. So that's the challenge, that we are having a limited options in terms of chemicals.
One of the quality parameters for seed, like the grains and things like that, is the number of weed seeds that are also in with the grains. Is that a significant way of moving the herbicide resistant genotypes around?
Yes. Recently, what happened has most of our soybean, most of our corn, we export to other countries. And there has been international standards in those products. And there's a inert material and weed seeds are one of those standards. And recently we have got email from our society as well as USDA that come up with the plans how we can minimize those weed seeds in the crop seeds, because some of the Chinese importer, they have stopped taking some of our soybean because of the pigweed seeds present in those crop seeds. So it's a function of what is escaping in those crops, what is leaving in those crops at the time of harvest, what you are harvesting with, and that's ultimately making those crop quality lower and making those export-import difficult. And it's not only that, they have also raised concern that, hey, we don't have this, let's say, pigweed in China. You are sending herbicide-resistant pigweed in our ways. So that's the hurdle with the growers, how to sell those, because the quality is lower in terms of having weed seeds in those grains.
Yeah, so you mentioned some weed genotypes with resistance to 5, 6 or more chemistries. What's the strategy then? How do you get on top of this?
Yeah, I feel fortunate and excited sometime that I'm in the field where there's a lot of growth. There's a lot to do. I don't know if you have probably noticed that recently, a weed science area, we have so many openings, so many positions coming up in industry as well as in academia and public sectors. And the reason is that we are struggling with these issues of resistance and crop weed competitions in different scenarios. So, considering that we are getting, way back in terms of herbicide options, industry is not coping up with the new molecules in the market, and we have more and more cases of resistance. So the shift of the research or weed science research has gone to looking at non-chemical strategies. What are the non-chemical strategies we can bring into our system? So historically, as I said, folks used to do tillage, but in our system, in Great Plains, High Plains, that's probably not a good recommendation if you want to give that. Folks will not like that because we've been promoting that no-till system for decades. And that is number one challenge. But in other areas, tillage is helping, and it's helping those folks controlling those herbicide resistant weeds or multiple resistant weeds. Another approach we are looking at is what are the ecological tactics? How about the crop weed competition? How we can make our crops so competitive against the weeds that we don't have to rely too much on chemicals. One example I can give that is ecological method we are testing here is cover crops. How the cover crops can come into the system and help suppressing those weed populations and reduce the seed bank. Again, these ecological tactics don't work like chemicals, but they have a fit in our system. If we can, let's say, suppress our weeds from 100 weeds to 70 weeds, there are still benefit having that. And you can add with the chemicals method of weed control. So that's just one example. Then other methods we are looking as the non-chemical methods are harvest weed seed control. That's a new thing, is kind of getting a lot of interest among growers and researchers throughout the globe. So when I say harvest weed seed control, it's basically a technique. When you're harvesting a crop, you have weeds in that crop. So you are harvesting the crop and you are also collecting those weed seeds. And then either you are destroying those weeds by crushing them when they're coming out of the combine. That's called harvest weed seed destruction. Or you can put them as a chaff, as a narrow line called chaff lining behind the combine. So this concept was brought up or discovered by a grower actually in Western Australia, in a dryland wheat grower actually, just similar to what we have in Western Kansas. He was struggling with the rigid ryegrass, multiple resistance rigid ryegrass. So what he did is he started destroying those ryegrass seeds when he was harvesting wheat. So over the 2-3 years when he did that, he found that he reduced the seed bank. He didn't have to deal with that problem with the chemicals. So, but in US or in North America, that technology has just arrived. And we are the first one in Kansas. We have bought that destructor and chaff liner. And we have got some USDA funds to test here in High Plains how that's going to work in our system. I'm just giving an example that those are the kind of approaches we are looking at it for the future work. Third thing, which I really like to touch base, is the precision ag. That's the coming future of the ag, digital agriculture or smart agriculture. You can name it differently, but that's happening. So from a weed control research or weed control perspective, precision agriculture is another way to look at these problems or herbicide resistant weed problems.
So how specifically does the precision ag, is it about applying chemical where it's needed, when it's needed? Is that the strategy there, or?
Yes, that there are different aspects there. Precision agriculture or precision technology is what I can envision is, it can help us at least doing field mapping to start with. If we can detect early detection of herbicide resistant weed population in a farm, and then we can develop strategies accordingly. And again, then the next level of precision ag could be a variable rates of herbicide application or spot treatment. We don't need to spray the whole farm maybe, but just in a little patch where we have herbicide resistant weeds growing. So that's where we can, have precision ag tools helping us in the future. If we have a good set of data, especially if we have good algorithms, good database, we can identify our pig weeds or kochia or any other weeds in our crops. I think that can help making your decisions or plans for weed control.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry, Maureen, I been dominating. It can go
No,
bad.
no, that's okay. It was, as he was talking about some of the methods that they're looking at it took me back to my previous life where working in the food safety area, we focused heavily on integrated pest management. It sounds to me like the directions that you're heading now that the chemicals are not doing what they're supposed to necessarily be doing, you're looking at these integrated systems of trying to control those weed productions from a whole variety of different areas. And it may be that there are packages or approaches that can be taken based on location, based on crop type, based on a variety of other things, but you will have then a group of tools in your toolbox.
Yes.
Am I interpreting that correctly?
Yes, you're right. You're on the same page. The things are like with this herbicide resistance management, it's all economic aspects. Economy drives these things. The farmer economy, when they are gonna make their weed control decision, they're gonna look at what herbicide, how much it takes, what is the rate, what is the cost. And if you see, like with the Roundup resistant weeds, folks have been switching to other chemistries which are more expensive and having more other issues, as well as like drift to other crops or drift to other organisms. From environmental standpoint, also chemical control is kind of getting hit in terms of some folks, they don't like some chemicals because they are hitting their other organism or other crops, sensitive crops. And the second is the economically, is it viable to use that chemistries? For example, most of the industry, you might notice these days, they're giving a talk, having a two or three different herbicide mode of action in a tank. They have a premixes available, 2 to 3 actives in those premixes, but those are very, very expensive. Those are not cheap products to use. So the idea with the growers, with the lower commodity prices, they don't want to put those high expensive herbicides, especially when you are doing in a fallow weed management, you're not getting any output or any return in those fallow fields. So to make the system more economical, you need to think about where my money is going in terms of inputs, those herbicide applications. And in fallow systems, grower used to spray like 3-4 times in the season. It's not like one application and they're done. They used to spray 3 times, 4 times. And you can imagine like 5,000 acres spraying 3 times, $10 an acre, that can multiply pretty quick. So that's where I think the folks or the weed science community is thinking to bring some of those cost-effective programs or cost-effective management strategies in our system that not only help suppressing this problem or suppressing these weeds, but also give benefit to the growers and the environment and the ecology or agroecology, like a cover crops. So we are not just thinking integrating cover crops for weed suppression, but we are thinking that cover crops can help suppressing weeds. It can help, fixing nitrogen. It can help improving the soil quality, soil health, and it can also be used for grazing purpose to the animals. So there is a livestock integration as well. So we are thinking from a system standpoint that can help folks to be more economically viable.
This next question is kind of out there. It's taking us probably outside of your major focus at this point, but I've done a bit of reading recently on the Land Institute and some of the work they're doing in Salina on perennial grains. Have you looked at that at all, or have any thoughts on perennial grains and if there's any value to that and what impact it would have on what you work on?
Definitely. I have not personally looked at that system yet, but I've been hearing that quite a bit. And we have a cropping system specialist here in Hayes. He's been talking one other day, was giving a presentation on that side of it. But I think, again, I would like to emphasize that perennial system or perennial grains bringing into our system is basically improving, our ecosystem and also increasing the economic value of the products as well as the farm profitability overall. And some of the work being led by cropping system specialist here or agronomist here, also looking at those forage species or annual forages or biennial forages or perennial forages as a part of the system that can integrate into our system. So from weed management side of it, I think that would be a win-win situation, that if that species or if those grains or perennial grains can provide that kind of weed suppression benefits what we are getting from other cover crops, I think that's what we need.
So one of the reasons we care about weeds as we do the other pests is their impact on production. We grow the crops to feed people. We grow the crops to feed the animals that become the food that feed people. Are there reasonable estimates of the economic impact or the yield impacts that, general rules of thumb? I know there are no exact numbers, but what are we talking about in terms of scale of impact that weeds have on food production, but then also what having herbicide resistant weeds contributes to that?
Definitely. There has been several reports in different crops, and I will just highlight some of the examples here. For kochia or Palmer amaranth, those are the prevalent species here in Western Kansas or central part of state. If you look at some of the reports on kochia, previous reports from my previous predecessor and other colleagues in other states, they have found kochia is quite competitive, irrespective of resistance. Let's say there's no resistance in these species. These weed species are very, very aggressive, very invasive. They have good traits, good biological traits to compete very well with the crops. First, you need to understand that the biology behind those weeds, that's why they're becoming more and more troublesome or problem for the folks here. So in terms of yield impact, I would say kochia, let's say, you leave the kochia season-long infestation in a crop like, let's say, sugar beet. That's the least competitive crop among all those crops we grow in the northern or central Great Plains. Up to 95% reduction in those sucrose yield, as well as the beet yields we have reported, or we have seen in the literature since 1970s, 1980s. Wheat, 20 to 30% yield reduction with the kochia, season-long infestation. When I'm saying the kochia is like moderate densities, 40 to 50 plants per square meter, if they are present, they can do that 20, 30% of damage to the yield. Pigweeds, they can choke our sorghum. So one of the worst fields I have seen in my lifetime here in Western Kansas is sorghum, because the folks, they don't have option. There's not a single effective option that can go with for controlling pigweed, controlling Palmer amaranth in sorghum, especially when the sorghum is above certain stage, like 30-inch tall. There's no label chemistry to go with controlling pigweed. And that's the time I start getting calls from growers. Hey, our pigweed is this much, our milo is already 2 feet tall. Can I spray dicamba? That's the off label. You cannot. And if you do it, you will hurt your yield. That will cause crop injuries. That will cause reducing the grain quality. So yield impact. I mean, there's a huge impact. And you can imagine now if those species are resistant and you are putting the chemical and they are surviving, 70% of those seedlings are surviving and, going up to the seed production, you can imagine that you have put the cost to control it, plus you still have a problem. So there's a double hit there.
Yeah.
Right.
And that's the double insult with resistance.
Yes. Right. So I think that's where we need to be more proactive, and we need to think more in longer term. The growers don't think in a longer term. They think on annual basis because their budget is running annual basis. They have, like, let's say 5,000 acres. They have a plan for 5,000 acres for 1 year. They don't have a plan for 3 years or 5 years. That's where the problem starts. And as I said, economy drives all these things, the resistance management. And that's become really, really challenging for researcher as well as extension person to convince folks to do things they're not doing.
You were talking about the aggressive nature of some of those weeds, and thought just came into my mind on the genetics of those materials. Is any work being done at K-State on the genetics of some of these weeds?
Yes, we have a weed physiologist, weed physiology lab in Manhattan. There has been quite a bit of work been done, and there's all kinds of different genetic mechanisms they have found in these weed species, why they are adapting to these kind of situations, herbicide applications. One example I can give here is kochia and Palmer amaranth. They have developed resistance to glyphosate, commonly used chemistry or herbicide in our system in Roundup Ready crops. We have seen both species, Palmer and kochia, what they do is they multiply that target gene. So they have more copies of that gene where the glyphosate go and target. So what it does is instead of one copy, single gene, they have Kochia has like 10, 15, 20 copies of that gene. So that those number of copies of that gene produce more enzyme. So the chemical cannot inhibit that much enzyme. So those plants survive those treatments. So that's how they are kind of adapting to that glyphosate treatment. Other mechanism recently, weed physiology lab in Manhattan, they have found with these multiple resistant pigweeds, what they are doing is they have enhanced metabolism. So some of the genes involved in metabolism in those plants, they got activated and they are just metabolizing whatever you're spraying. So no matter what, even a new chemistry is not even existing, it can just metabolize because it's not reaching to the target gene and hitting those target sites. So that is a more fearful thing happening in the nature, that metabolism based mechanism is also evolving in weed species. And as I said, it's a function of the biology of the weed species, like Palmer amaranth, very diverse genetic background. Kochia, same way, is a very diverse genetic background. A lot of gene pools there sitting in those individuals, and they can adapt and they can evolve to any of those stresses. Among other biological feature, if you read about Kochia or Palmer, both are highly prolific seed producers. A single Kochia plant can produce hundreds of thousands of seeds. One female Palmer amaranth can produce millions of seeds. So that many seed production, it has potential to infest more areas, more lands, and keep going if you don't manage them properly.
Is dissemination and equipment problematic locally? So going from one field to the next?
Yes, pigweed or Palmer amaranth. We had a meeting, North Central Weed Science meeting, talking with the folks from North Dakota and South Dakota. They have started seeing Palmer amaranth. It was not the case 5 years back, and that's happening because of movement of equipment, movement of products like hay, movement or for animal feed. People take the animal feed and take to the other states, and those Palmer seeds go with that and infest those areas. So that's kind of tricky, managing those movement is very difficult. That's where we kind of emphasize that control those weeds in the field so that you don't have to deal with in the products like hay or grain or equipment. For weeds like Kochia, it's a tumbleweed. It doesn't need that equipment. It can tumble miles and miles when the wind is blowing. And that's the kind of beauty of that weed species that finds new areas of infestations with the high winds, especially in the high plains. It can tumble. It's very hard to kind of contain that.
How is the contaminated seed physically removed from the grain itself? I'm sitting here trying to get in my mind, if we're going to be selling to other countries and they've got obviously a lower limit that's allowed in there, is there some kind of a sieving practice or an air movement as the heavier seed goes through? How is that done?
Yeah, I don't know exactly how that will happen because we are talking like a bulk export, and folks just take the produce from the field and sell it to the cooperative marketing places. And I don't know how much storage they have, and it gets pretty big pretty quickly. So that's where we try to emphasize to the growers, hey, if you can manage in the field, that's the best you can do. You don't let it go to the produce or to the grains. I see that's where this harvest weed seed destruction is gonna have a fit very well. That can destroy the weed seeds. Don't let it go into the grains and escape folks to get the contaminated grains. And it's not only that. In crops like wheat, we have a problem. We have a central Kansas growers, they've been dealing with the rye, feral rye or cereal rye issues. So those rye, what it does is it contaminates, it has allergen. So it contaminates the grains. When you export to the Asian country, they don't take that because they are allergic to that allergens in cereal rye. So the idea there is, and it's very difficult, there's no in-season chemical you can try and control in wheat unless you have herbicide resistant wheat like coaxium wheat or clearfield wheat, where you can spray some of the herbicide and get rid of those grass species. So in those situations, again, this seed destruction can really, really help folks not letting those weed seed grains in the crop grains.
Is there a limit in the seed size? Or I think that new technology sounds excellent for being able to destroy the seed in the field. Are there limits to that in terms of which species would be vulnerable?
Yeah, those are all questions we are trying to address here as a future research. In Australia, they have destroyed these rigid ryegrass. That's quite a bigger size, like a wheat grain size of the wheat seeds we are talking. But the things we are talking here, like pigweeds, very tiny, small, black color seed, and water hemp or kochia, they're very tiny seeds, very small seeded weeds. As per my experience, I have got the unit last fall, September, and we put together, there's a technical team came and put it on a combine, and I said, let's try that. One of the grower field, we took it 5 miles south of Hayes and run on a grower farm, was heavily infested with the palmer amaranth. I couldn't see even a sorghum plant. There was all palmer amaranth. And I was trying to do that. The idea was how that goes. I was very curious how much destruction it can do, especially in crop like sorghum when it's green and high material, you're going through the combine, what kind of destruction it can do. I was very, very curious. But somehow I found that we collected some of the samples out of the combine, behind the combine of that destructor. I was amazed to see like 85-90% of destruction was doing on those palmer amaranth seeds. Those tiny seed was kind of pulverized. It was like powder form after that. So I was pretty amazed. So I was telling my team of folks from Iowa State and University of Arkansas, we're going to run this in soybean, corn, as well as sorghum plots in the coming season to see if what it does and how the crop species or how the crop varieties also matters using this technology, not only weed species, and then how the environment impact those results in high plain versus Midwest versus Mid-South, how things change from region to region, crop to crop, weeds to weeds. And with this grant, we have also a AgriCon person on the team. So going to look at the economic side of it, because as I said, economy drives everything. And if we're going to promote this technology, where we stand in terms of economy, is it cost effective? Is it sustainable? So I think I'm telling more future research here, but that's going to happen.
Yeah, good. Sounds promising.
Yeah, pretty interesting, pretty exciting. And along with that, we are also not looking at one tool at a time. Our main mission with this project, which we got funded by NIFA based on our GFS grant, was to bringing all the tools together. It's like bringing little hammers together. So we have a cover crops early in the season, we have herbicides applied, and then at the end of the season, we're gonna do seed destruction versus chaff lining and comparing with what growers are normally doing conventional harvest. So there are 3 different approaches we are trying to bring in one growing season to say, hey, early season management with the cover crop, herbicides, late season management, or weed seed management with this destructor or chaff lining, how they come together as a system and help growers if they are struggling with some of these multiple resistant pigweeds.
Well, I appreciate your mentioning the seed grant and appreciate you having come to Manhattan to present the results of that work recently. And that information will be up on our website in the near future. We'll have all of those and have those available for anyone to listen to as well. Yep. And I'm glad to hear that it panned out into a larger grant. So that's great.
Yes. That was really good support to get that kind of grant and to reach out to the folks what they're really looking for. The survey we did, me and Sarah, we learned a lot. And some of that information we just plug in our proposal and it sold out pretty quickly. And to your surprise and to my surprise, that proposal was ranked number one in CPPM in the country, was in that program, NIFA CPPM program. And the secretary with agriculture wrote a letter to the PI that it was excellent proposal to put together for such kind of strategies looking in the soybean system.
Congratulations on that. That's great.
Congratulations on that. Yeah,
Yeah.
That's
that's excellent.
Yeah, that was really really a great help from the GFS grant money that we could create some data, supplement data for the proposal.
Well, the phenomena of resistance is just creeping through agriculture. So it's the herbicide resistant weeds, it's the fungicide resistant pathogens, it's the antibiotic resistant bacterial pathogens. And we really need to get a handle on it if we're going to continue to produce at the levels we've been producing. So I'm wondering if the strategies you're looking at, if there are some general principles that you think will be helpful in the other arenas as well, not just the herbicide resistance, but in the others.
Yeah, the basic principles we are looking at, the diversity in our system. I think diversity is the key for sustainability. You keep doing one thing again and again, you will see a problem. That's we have seen in our herbicide based methods of weed control. You've been doing same chemistries over and over. We have seen resistance issues. Diversity could be anything, diverse cropping systems, diverse methods of weed control, doing different things. You don't give same thing to that weed or to that pest again and again, that pest start adapting to that methods or that strategy. So every year you change that strategies and give something new to the pest and hit those pests with a different approach. So diversity, I think, is the key what we are trying to achieve with this integrated weed management system or IPM systems, that you bring diversity in crop, diversity in your herbicide, diversity in your weed species, overall system-wide. I think that's the key principle we are looking at it. And that can be translated easily to the other disciplines, like, as you mentioned, plant pathology or entomology, not to look at one strategy or one thing at a time, but looking at the system level where things can bring the diversity into the system.
I love this area. So you mentioned that there are a lot of opportunities right now for weed scientists. And I look at the agronomy department here at K-State as being really strong in terms of the scope of capabilities, the expertise that's in that department. It's pretty impressive what they've got within one department. So what if there are students that listen to this, either graduates or undergraduate students listening to this, what skill sets would you recommend? Chemistry, ecology, what skill sets would you recommend if they want to help tackle this problem?
Yeah, that's a great question. As I mentioned, there's a lot of opportunities coming for fresh graduates and a lot of weed science positions recently opening up in academia, industry, and other public sectors and private sectors. What I see as a weed scientist in this position, the four most important skill sets I can see is the knowledge of field-based research, field-based weed science research. Every fresh graduates they need, and then training of all the plant science, biochemistry, physiology, genetics, or those are specialized area already there. If you can take a little bit of that, have some expertise, you don't need to be doing 5 different projects in that area, but if you have little component of those areas, that really help understanding the problem, from the root standpoint of view. But applied weed science, statistical skills, how to handle the data, because the future is all about the data. With all this digital agriculture, you're going to tackle with a big data set, how to look at the data. There is a lot of data, but what you make out of the data. So statistical analysis or analytical skills are also very important. And then you can also look at chemistries in a weed science, especially herbicide. You need to know what you are doing and what you're tackling with. Because again, 70%, more than 70% of the calls the growers give me is they ask me the option. herbicide option. They don't ask me, hey, should I try this cover crop? They simply ask, hey, can I spray dicamba if glyphosate is not working? How expensive? Is there a generic one? Is there a lower price one? What is the formulation? All kinds of chemistry related question will come if you are going to go to those real world situations like applied weed science. Precision ag or engineering side of it, if you can learn some of the skills, I think that's the benefit as well, because that's happening right now. Precision agriculture tools, a lot of weed science folks, they have started using it and implementing into their programs. And that's going to be the future. A lot of the industry investment is going into that digital agriculture, especially from pest management, especially from weed management perspective. So those are some of the skills I just listed: is applied weed science, applied field-based research, chemistry knowledge, a little bit of those physiology, genetics, biochemistry knowledge, statistical, analytical approaches, and precision ag. I think if you have a little bit of all of those and you can sell yourself, you will get the job, I'm sure, for the weed scientists, as far as I know. Yep.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks.
Great question and good bit of information for the students here on campus to file away as they think about what they want to work on.
Yes. And I think I would also encourage undergraduate students, if they are interested in ag, and if they are specifically interested in weeds or any other pests, they should do some project. They should contact folks on main campus or research center to get involved and to learn how to handle the project and what to do in terms of research and how the research is conducted and how the data is handled. That's pretty basic, but there's quite a bit of learning before you get into your graduate schools or master or PhD. If you can do a little project in undergrad, that'll be really, really helpful.
I've enjoyed this conversation quite a
This has
bit.
been great.
One other big challenge on the horizon is, of course, climate change. And a number of studies done on how it's impacting the migration of plant populations and impacting fertility of some plant species, things like that. Does that come into play here in terms of weed management?
Yes, exactly. If you talk about climate change or drastic changes in environmental conditions, weeds are one of those first species who will adapt to these changes because they have highly diverse genetic background and they have already been doing that. The molecular weed science program in Colorado State has been looking at kochia from different angle. So they're trying to sequence the whole genome. They're trying to characterize some of the genes, good genes, they call it good genes, which are helping this kochia to adapt cold treatments or the frost or drought or heat or salt or even herbicide resistance. How those genes can be incorporated into our crops to make them more resilient for the future. Okay, so that's kind of angle to look at these weed species. We have that gene pool in those species. Why don't we characterize and understand then how and what they can do when we incorporate those genes in our crops for the future crops that can be resilient to these changes in climate and environment. But as I said, changing climate, changing environment, adaptation is going to happen. Evolution is going to happen in those weed species. Along with that, what's going to happen is interaction of the chemistry with the plant and the environment is going to change. And that's very critical to understand. The efficacy of some of the chemicals we are seeing now probably will not be there in that future environment or future climate, just because plant adapt and they adapt differently. They have a thick cuticle, for example. The chemical may not penetrate that thick cuticle in the future and cannot give you 90-95% control versus less than 70% control. So the efficacy is going to change, or with increasing temperature or increasing carbon dioxide, C3, C4 species, who's going to win. And depending on those weed species, are those C3 or C4, the shift will happen. And there'll be a lot to play with the climate and the precip also, precipitation, how the precipitation change globally. Some of these weed shifts also going to shift. Some of the prediction has been done. Okay, if Great Plains start getting more rain, for example, we start going to see water hemp coming this way in Great Plains. If it's going to get more drier, kochia is going to start going towards Midwest. There are predictions happening, and I think that's true. based on the biology of those weed species and based on the history of those species, how they have infested and they have lineated themselves in those geography based on the climate.
Vipin, you had talked about when you were first over in the US, you were working in Louisiana State, working on cotton. And with climate change, I'm sure that that impacts this. We're seeing cotton work its way into Kansas cropping. Are you seeing, I mean, I know your focus is on the weed side of things, but are you seeing some of those other types of crops moving in more and more into these areas, some of the crops that we're used to moving further north and having some new impacts of weed stress and that type of thing coming in with these new crops?
Definitely, with changing things, with the changing environment and climate, these things are happening. And we need to be very resilient in terms of adopting those things, changing things. Like we were doing this faculty meeting other day and prioritizing our missions for the unit other days. So one of the priority we have for next 10, 15, 20 years is to look at alternative crops, new crops, basically, what folks need, provided that our conditions get changed, our environment gets changed, we get less precip, we get more dry land. What are the alternative crops? Things like pearl millet is number one, can be adapted to in the West. That has not been expanded, but there's a lot of potential for that crop. There's a lot of potential for canola in the Southwest Kansas. That has been happening, already happening, expanding. And as you mentioned, cotton, yes, it has gone up. It was not the case 5-6 years ago, but it has gone up. 300,000 acres of cotton in Kansas. Can you imagine? And then over the top of that, you can see the changes. The commodity commissions have started funding some of the positions for those areas as well. They are looking for a cotton specialist in Kansas. They can support, they said. So things have been changing with the climate change, with the environmental change, as well as other changes. And one thing I can say for sure from a weed science perspective, you bring new things, new crops, for example, that has long-term impacts on our weed population. Some of the previous studies, long-term studies, 10, 20 years long-term studies have shown that the crop rotation, competitive crops, and what kind of crop you are growing will have ultimate impact on those weed population. If you are growing, for example, let's say highly competitive crop like corn or could be any cereal grains that grows pretty aggressively, it can shift some of those weed population over the time. A study done in Nebraska has shown that you keep doing this corn soybean rotation, you will see more and more issues with the resistant kochia and resistant pigweed. But you bring cereal into the system, you will lower down some of those resistance issues. It's because the crop competition, it suppress those cycles of those weed species and don't let them produce seeds. So weed shift is going to happen when these crop changes going to come into play in our system. But as again, I said, we have to be very resilient and proactive. Like things are happening and it's going to happen, especially from climate change standpoint. So we need to be resilient. What alternative crops we can grow and we can still make these folks or the growers more profitable in the future, considering all these constraints of weeds and other pests we will have.
Yeah, I'm hoping for mango and oranges.
Good luck on that one, Jim.
Yeah. Not sure on that.
Be a long wait.
Yes.
Really, this has been a fun and interesting discussion. I want to thank you so much for your time. And thank you, Jim, for joining us as well. Do you have any final remarks, Vipin, or any questions you might have for us before we sign off?
Well, I would like to thank you both for your time. And also, I like to reiterate that the support I got through the GFS grant was pretty timely and very supportive. And I could develop that project based on that information. So I would keep looking at future opportunities from GFS folks that I can come up with and collaborate with the folks from other discipline. And I would encourage young faculty at K-State to look for those opportunities and to come up with the ideas there where they can collaborate with the folks like me sitting in Hayes versus in Manhattan, and we come to know each other. That's a great opportunity and really appreciate all the support you guys have.
I'm so glad it worked out well. And thank you for your efforts there very much.
Thank you.
If you have any questions or comments you would like to share, check out our website at ksu.edu/research/global food and drop us an email. Our music was adapted from Wayne Gowen's album, Chronicles of Carmela. Special thanks to him for providing that to us. Something to Chew On is produced by the Office of Research Development at Kansas State University.